There are names in history that echo across centuries. Names we know, names we study, names we are taught to revere or to fear. But then, there are names that vanish. Not because they were lost in the dust of time, but because someone, somewhere, chose to erase them. Tonight we speak of one such name, a name that was not meant to survive the censors, the archivists, the carefully constructed silence of official history. And yet, it whispers through fragments, through rumors, through forgotten margins of old reports. A name spoken softly, almost as though the very act of saying it aloud was dangerous. That name is 3I/Atlas. At first glance, it doesn't sound like much. A code, perhaps? A label, another one of those strange combinations of letters and numbers that governments and corporations seem to adore. But behind those four characters, 3I, behind the word Atlas, there lies a story. A story that touches on secrets hidden from the public. A story that raises questions of power, fear, and knowledge too heavy to be trusted in the hands of ordinary people. You will not find this name in textbooks. You will not stumble upon it in the neat, organized databases of mainstream history. And if you look for it in official archives, you will be met with nothing but silence. The absence is too clean, too precise, like a section of a painting carefully scrubbed away until the canvas shows through. But absence itself tells a story. The first time whispers of 3I Atlas appears is not in a book, or an article, or a lecture. It comes instead through the voices of those who claim to have seen too much. Old engineers, scientists, low-ranking clerks, people who worked in the shadows of larger institutions. They speak of files that were marked for destruction, of projects that never officially existed, of things that seemed too extraordinary and too dangerous to be explained. These whispers almost always share a common warning. You weren't meant to know this. But why? Why would a name, just a name, be treated with such caution? To understand that, you must step back into the world that created it. The mid-20th century, when science and ambition collided with secrecy and paranoia. It was an age where nations raced not only for dominance on Earth, but for control of the skies above, the seas below, and the invisible forces that seemed to pulse through the universe itself. Atomic power had just torn open the curtain of possibility, and behind it, governments and private enterprises scrambled to see what else might be waiting. In this feverish pursuit, countless projects were born. Some became legends, others faded into obscurity, and a select few were deliberately buried. 3I Atlas belongs to the last category. The name itself is strange. 3I. What does it mean? Some say it stood for Third Intelligence Initiative. Others believe it referred to three intersections, a code for the converging fields of physics, psychology, and something far older, far stranger. Still others whisper it meant nothing at all, just a placeholder, a mask to hide what truly lay beneath. And then there is Atlas, the titan who held the sky on his shoulders, a figure from mythology, forever burdened with carrying the heavens above. Why choose that name? Was it symbolic? Did it refer to carrying a weight too vast for humankind? Or was it something more literal, an attempt to map, to hold, to lift something that should never have been touched? The pairing of 3I and Atlas feels deliberate, like two fragments of a puzzle designed to reveal nothing on their own, but to hint at something far larger when placed side by side. But here lies the unsettling truth. Unlike other secret projects whose existence eventually leaked through declassified papers or retired personnel, 3i Atlas leaves behind almost nothing tangible. No official files, no photographs, no archived budgets or construction blueprints. Instead, we are left with silence. And in history, silence is rarely accidental. Consider this. When something is erased too thoroughly, it suggests not irrelevance, but importance. No one spends resources covering up what does not matter. No one silences a story unless that story has the power to shake, to disrupt, to challenge the carefully maintained narrative of reality. So the very absence of records is itself a message, a warning perhaps, or a clue. Those who stumbled across fragments of the name often describe a feeling of unease. Not fear exactly, but a deep discomfort, like staring at an old photograph and realizing that something in the background doesn't belong, something human eyes weren't meant to see. An engineer, long retired, once told a journalist that he saw the name 3i Atlas on a scrap of paper inside a restricted filing cabinet. No explanation, no context, just the name. When he asked his supervisor what it meant, he was told quietly, "Don't ask about that again." The next day, the cabinet was gone, replaced with another, locked and sealed, containing nothing but ordinary reports. This is how the name survives, not through official channels, but through the stubborn, fragile persistence of human memory, through stories passed like contraband, through rumors exchanged in hushed tones. And perhaps that, too, was intentional. Perhaps the project was never meant to be fully erased, but only hidden, removed from plain sight, but allowed to echo faintly so that those curious enough might still sense its shadow. But then comes the more chilling question. Why? Why would knowledge of 3i Atlas be hidden so carefully, so deliberately, and for so long? Why erase it from public view, but leave just enough residue for whispers to spread? The unsettling answer may be this: because those in power believed that if the truth of 3i Atlas were ever known, it would not simply rewrite our understanding of history, it would challenge our understanding of reality itself. Think of how myths and folklore linger. Stories of gods and titans, of secret realms, of knowledge forbidden to mortals. We dismiss them as metaphor, as ancient imagination. But what if, hidden beneath the poetry of myth, there was truth? What if projects like 3i Atlas were not exploring new frontiers, but uncovering very old ones? Frontiers humanity had encountered before, and wisely turned away from. It is here that the name Atlas gains new weight. The Titan condemned to carry the heavens was not punished for weakness, but for defiance, for daring to take part in a war that shook the order of the cosmos. To name a project after him is to acknowledge a burden too immense for mankind, a weight that once lifted cannot be easily set down again. So when we ask why no official record of 3i Atlas exists, the answer may not be as simple as it was classified. It may be closer to this: some truths are hidden not to protect governments, but to protect us. Because knowledge is not always safe, because some discoveries do not enlighten, they consume. And the reason this name was buried, scrubbed clean from the ledgers of history, is perhaps not because it failed, but because it succeeded. Succeeded in revealing something too vast, something too dangerous, something we were never meant to know. And yet, here we are, whispering its name once more. 3I Atlas.
The name 3I Inter-Atlas drifts into the present like a ghost. But to understand it fully, we must first return to the shadows of its birth. It is not enough to know that it was erased. We must attempt to glimpse why it was created at all. And that trail begins with the three characters at the heart of its code, 3I. For decades, researchers, conspiracy theorists, and archivists who dwell in forgotten stacks have debated what those letters meant. Some claim they stood for Third Intelligence Initiative, a classified program buried under the layers of the Cold War. Others insist 3I meant Integrated Interdimensional Investigation, a phrase that seems outlandish until you realize how seriously, in secret, scientists once pursued the impossible. There are even whispers of a simpler interpretation, 3 eyes, a cryptic allusion to perception beyond the ordinary, to seeing not just with human vision, but with something deeper, sharper, unblinking. Whatever the true expansion, one fact unites them all. 3I was never intended to be spoken in public. The story begins in the late 1940s, just after the Second Great War. The world had seen what science could do when driven by desperation. The splitting of the atom, the fire of Hiroshima, the power to level cities in a single heartbeat. But alongside this terror came a new hunger, an insatiable drive to discover what else might be possible. If men could tear open the building blocks of matter, what boundaries remained? Could gravity itself be bent? Could time be stretched? Could the hidden layers of reality, long whispered about in myth and religion, be brought into the harsh light of the laboratory? And so quietly, governments and private enterprises funded projects that probed deeper than the public would ever be allowed to know. In America, in the Soviet Union, in Europe, vast sums disappeared into black budgets marked only with vague titles like Advanced Sciences or Defense Applications. 3I was among them. Unlike other initiatives that pursued rockets, weapons, or computers, 3I's focus was more elusive. It straddled the border between the measurable and the unexplainable. Its architects recruited not only physicists and engineers, but also psychologists, folklorists, even theologians, the kind of minds who could look at the same phenomenon and see both numbers and symbols, equations and archetypes. Because 3I was not simply about machines, it was about perception itself. It asked, what lies beyond the veil of ordinary senses? What is it that humankind has glimpsed only in visions, dreams, and ancient myths, but never been able to capture with instruments? Connections between 3I and other secret programs are faint, but they exist if you know where to look. A declassified report from the early 1950s describes a project concerned with extended cognitive capacities under induced states. Though it never mentions 3I by name, the language echoes what little we know, the attempt to bridge human thought with forces outside the known spectrum. Elsewhere, a Soviet scientist defecting to the West in 1961 spoke cryptically of a trifold initiative designed to explore communication with external intelligences. He refused to elaborate, and within a year he vanished from public record. But the phrase trifold initiative bears an uncanny resemblance to 3I. It is as though pieces of the puzzle slip through cracks just enough to hint at the larger picture. So, what did they do? What experiments were carried out under the banner of 3I? The stories are fragmentary, but they share a chilling consistency. Rooms lined with lead, where volunteers sat in silence for days exposed to strange pulses of light and sound. Devices that combined early computer circuits with patterns taken from medieval alchemical texts. And always the same goal, to reach beyond what the eye could see, the ear could hear, the hand could touch. Some researchers described it in purely scientific terms, an exploration of non-local consciousness or quantum entanglement extended into the mind.
but others spoke differently. They said the experiments were not discovering anything new at all. Instead, they were uncovering something ancient, something humanity had once known, then forgotten, then buried under myth. Take, for example, the so-called dream convergence trials. Whispers claim that 3I scientists recruited subjects who were unusually sensitive, dreamers, artists, even children. These volunteers were guided into deep states of sleep, while machines monitored their brainwaves and whispered tones into their ears. According to scraps of testimony, many began to dream the same images, night after night. A vast structure, rising like a pillar into the dark, a weight pressing down as though the sky itself were too heavy to hold. The imagery was so consistent, so universal, that some researchers began to wonder, were the subjects merely imagining the same symbol, or were they all touching the same reality? A place that existed outside of them, waiting to be seen. The name Atlas begins to take on new meaning here. Was this what they saw in their collective visions? The Titan straining beneath the vault of the heavens? Was this myth reborn not in poetry, but in experiment? Then there were the resonance chambers. Concrete vaults buried deep underground, outfitted with generators that produced low-frequency vibrations. Subjects placed inside often reported sensations of floating, of time dissolving, of standing on the edge of something vast and alive. A few claimed to hear voices, not human, but not entirely alien either. When these accounts surfaced in later years, skeptics dismissed them as hallucinations, the predictable result of sensory manipulation. But those who believed saw them as something more, a first contact with whatever lay beyond the veil. It was here, perhaps, that the boundaries between science and myth began to blur most dangerously. For what is myth, if not the echo of truths humanity once encountered, then wrapped in story to survive? What is science, if not the attempt to strip those echoes bare and measure them? 3I walked the knife edge between the two, and sometimes it seemed it fell into both at once. Those who studied the fragments of 3I's work have pointed out curious overlaps with ancient traditions. The so-called 3 eyes motif, for example, appears in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in esoteric Christian texts. Always it is a symbol of perception beyond the ordinary, of seeing truth hidden from the flesh. To call a project 3I may have been a coded acknowledgement of these ancient symbols, wrapped in modern language. But yet there was always danger. Experiments strayed too far. Volunteers broke down. There are stories of scientists who refused to continue after witnessing what their subjects described. One is said to have resigned after declaring, "We're not building machines. We are building doors. And doors once opened cannot always be closed." The deeper one peers into the origins of 3I, the more one senses that it was not a unified project at all, but a convergence. Different fields, different disciplines, all pouring into the same river. Some believed they were studying psychology, others thought they were mapping physics, still others whispered of spiritual warfare disguised as science. But in the end, the results pointed in the same direction, toward something larger than human perception, toward a reality that seemed to wait just beyond reach, stretching out its hand through dreams, vibrations, and symbols. This is why 3I blurred the line between science and myth, because the two, in those hidden rooms and shadowed labs, were not separate. They were two sides of the same coin. And perhaps that was the most dangerous discovery of all. Not that myths were false, nor that science was cold truth, but that both had always been describing the same thing. The same ancient, unfathomable reality, dressed in different languages, across different ages. For the men and women of 3I, this realization came not in libraries or lectures, but in experiments that shook the very core of their being. It left them with questions no equations could solve, no instruments could measure. And so, the project pressed onward. Deeper, darker. From experiments in perception to the attempt, unthinkable to most, to harness what they had found.
The Atlas Project began far from the light of day.
hidden in facilities whose names never appeared on maps. These laboratories were not announced with grand ceremonies, nor recorded in official archives. They existed in places where silence was the rule, and secrecy was the foundation of every wall. Some say the earliest site was buried deep beneath a mountain range, chosen for its isolation and its natural shielding from outside eyes. Others insist it was hidden inside an abandoned industrial complex, outwardly decrepit, but pulsing at night with strange hums and lights. Wherever the truth lies, one thing is certain. Atlas was designed to remain invisible. The men and women who entered those facilities were not ordinary researchers. They were hand-picked from across the world, drawn from universities, military programs, and even obscure spiritual traditions. Physicists worked beside linguists. Engineers shared corridors with psychologists. A strange and unlikely fellowship, united by one purpose: to explore what 3i had uncovered. What exactly had been uncovered was never spoken of openly. Each team was told only fragments, enough to complete their assigned tasks. But when fragments align, patterns begin to form. And those who looked too closely began to suspect that Atlas was no ordinary scientific venture. It was something far greater and far more dangerous. The laboratories were filled with machines whose purpose was rarely explained. Vast coils of copper that throbbed with current, oscillating mirrors that reflected nothing recognizable, chambers built to contain forces that should not exist. Some describe these devices as crude attempts to map the unseen, to chart dimensions of existence that do not yield to normal instruments. Others whispered that the machines were not mapping anything at all, but calling to it, summoning. In the earliest days of Atlas, records speak of unusual readings that baffled even the most seasoned scientists. Energy fluctuations appeared in sealed chambers where no power source existed. Instruments designed to detect magnetic resonance showed patterns that matched nothing in the known spectrum. Geiger counters ticked faintly, though no radiation was present. At first, these anomalies were dismissed as noise, faulty equipment, errors of calibration. But as days turned into weeks, the anomalies grew stronger, stranger, more insistent. Oscilloscopes filled with repeating waveforms that seemed almost deliberate. Temperature shifted unpredictably, dropping suddenly to near freezing before snapping back to normal. Lights flickered in patterns that seemed to pulse in time with the human heartbeat. There were times when even the human body seemed to respond. Volunteers placed in testing rooms described a heaviness in the air, a pressure behind the eyes, a ringing in the ears that rose and fell with the energy fluctuations. Others reported sudden visions, images of vast landscapes, towering pillars, and skies split open with blinding light. Others claimed to hear voices, distant but unmistakable, speaking in languages no one could identify. One technician wrote in his private journal that he felt as though the building itself was alive, breathing around us, listening to every word. That journal was confiscated soon after he was caught sharing its contents with a colleague. He never returned to work. The scientists who tried to make sense of the anomalies soon discovered something more unsettling. The readings did not behave like natural phenomena. They were not random nor chaotic. They showed signs of intention. Patterns emerged that mirrored human speech. Vibrations aligned with mathematical sequences too precise to be accidents. Some waveforms even seemed to respond when researchers adjusted their instruments, as though something on the other side was aware of being observed. Atlas was no longer merely a scientific investigation. It was becoming a dialogue.
Not everyone was comfortable with this. A handful of researchers, disturbed by what they had seen, attempted to raise concerns. They wrote letters to superiors, warning that the project was straying into territory where science could not provide safeguards. They spoke quietly to trusted colleagues about their fears. But those who questioned Atlas never lasted long. A young engineer, only in his 20s, confided to a friend that he believed Atlas was contacting an intelligence not of this Earth. Within weeks, he was reassigned, then discharged. Months later, his name appeared in a small-town obituary, the cause of death listed as an accident. A linguist who claimed the strange waveforms carried linguistic structure tried to leak her findings to a university contact. She disappeared during a routine commute, her car found abandoned on the roadside, the engine still running. And then there was the physicist whose notes suggested Atlas was not just detecting energies, but opening pathways. He gave one single anonymous interview to a journalist, describing doors that were never meant to be opened. The story never went to print. Days later, the journalist resigned under mysterious circumstances, and the physicist's trail vanished entirely. Whistleblowers did not survive long within the shadow of Atlas. Their voices were swallowed by the silence that surrounded the project. What little escaped surfaced only in fragments, rumors, whispers, hints scribbled in private diaries never meant to be seen. Yet those fragments reveal a chilling picture. Atlas was not simply observing, it was not simply measuring. The experiments were pushing further, seeking direct interaction with whatever force lay behind the anomalies. Machines were tuned like instruments, adjusted again and again until the patterns grew stronger, clearer, undeniable. The deeper the project went, the more the strange energy readings began to resemble communication. But communication with what? With whom? Some believed it was another dimension, brushing against our own. Others insisted it was a vast intelligence, something that had always been here, hidden just outside perception. A few whispered of ancient beings remembered in myth, now rediscovered through wires, coils, and circuits. Whatever it was, Atlas had found it, and it had noticed them in return. The laboratories became places of unease, where shadows lingered too long and machinery seemed to hum even when switched off. Guards stationed at the facilities reported nightmares so vivid they refused to sleep on site. Technicians claimed they saw figures in the corners of their vision, vanishing when confronted. The official reports, if they exist, have never been released, but personal accounts suggest that by the height of Atlas, the very air in those laboratories felt charged, alive, oppressive, as though the barrier between worlds had thinned to a fragile membrane, straining against the pressure of forces beyond comprehension. And still, the work continued. Driven by ambition, by curiosity, or perhaps by orders from those above, the scientists of Atlas pressed forward. The hidden laboratories expanded, the machines grew larger, the energy readings climbed higher. They were no longer simply chasing anomalies. They were building a bridge. And though many who witnessed it tried to speak, their voices were silenced. One by one, they vanished, swallowed by the very shadows that Atlas itself had conjured.
The deeper Atlas pushed into the unknown, the more it became clear that what they were uncovering was not simply unusual, not merely unexplained. It was something that unsettled the very foundation of what it means to be human. At first, the discoveries seemed thrilling. The machines, tuned with painstaking precision, began to return signals that could no longer be dismissed as noise. Patterns repeated with uncanny regularity. Energy surges rose and fell in perfect mathematical intervals.
For the scientists, it felt as though they had found the heartbeat of something vast. But soon, excitement gave way to fear. The breakthrough came when the patterns began to mirror human thought. A psychologist tasked with monitoring volunteers noticed that fluctuations in the energy fields seemed to synchronize with the brainwaves of those present. When a subject focused on a simple shape, like a circle or a triangle, the readings shifted to replicate it. When another thought of music, oscilloscopes pulsed in rhythm with imagined melodies. It was as if the anomaly was listening, responding, reflecting back the contents of the human mind. Researchers were shaken. They had set out to measure energy, but what they found was interaction, communication. The entity, or force, or dimension they had touched was not passive, it was aware. And then came the moment that turned wonder into terror. During one session, a volunteer was asked to imagine a simple image, a tree. He closed his eyes, focused, and described it aloud. The roots, the trunk, the branches spreading into the sky. The instruments echoed his thought. But then, without prompting, the waveforms shifted again. The volunteer began to speak of things he swore he had not imagined. The tree he pictured was no longer just a tree. It was enormous, cosmic in scale, its branches stretching into realms of light and shadow. At its base, figures moved, shapes that were not human, bending toward him as though aware of his gaze. He opened his eyes in panic, but the instruments kept pulsing, as if transmitting a vision that came from elsewhere, not from him. Afterward, the man refused to return. He described the vision as an intrusion, a thought that was not his own forced into his mind. He said, "It knew I was there. It saw me." That phrase, "it saw me," began to circulate quietly among staff. Many would repeat it in the weeks that followed. The more the researchers experimented, the more the entity, or presence, seemed to reveal. Volunteers reported vivid hallucinations, shared visions of vast landscapes that none of them had ever seen before. Towers of stone stretching into black skies, oceans of liquid light, endless plains where colossal figures moved slowly as though sculpted from the elements themselves. The visions were too consistent to be coincidence. Subjects separated in different chambers described identical details, the same structures, the same beings, the same oppressive sense of being observed. Some began to believe they had tapped into another reality, one that had always existed beside our own, not a dimension of physics alone, but a domain of mind and spirit, where thought and matter intertwined. The evidence became impossible to ignore. Instruments recorded energy bursts too vast to originate from the human brain. Magnetic fields spiked in perfect synchrony with visions reported by multiple subjects. Even the physical environment of the laboratories was affected. Metal warped subtly, glass cracked without impact, air chilled to unnatural degrees. And then came the most unsettling discovery of all. The anomalies seemed to anticipate them. Before researchers initiated an experiment, instruments sometimes reacted, as if the presence already knew what was about to happen. A physicist described it in a secret note. "We are not studying it. It is studying us." Fear spread quietly through the teams. Some refused to enter the resonance chambers. Others demanded to be reassigned. But higher authorities insisted the work continue. Too much had been invested. Too much had been revealed. And so the experiments pushed further, and the findings grew darker. One test involved projecting complex equations into the anomaly, mathematical puzzles meant to measure intelligence. The response came back in patterns more complex than what had been sent. Not random, not scrambled,
but amplified, evolved. Equations returned with layers of meaning no human mathematician could immediately decipher. It was not simply answering, it was teaching. But speak of what? When linguists attempted to analyze the signals, they reported sensations that went beyond comprehension. Headaches, hallucinations, an overwhelming sense of dread. One described the message as a shape in the mind that cannot be held, only felt, like looking into the sun of another world. Some messages, when decoded into sound, produced effects on listeners that defied explanation. Heart rate spiked, blood pressure dropped, a few fainted outright. One researcher collapsed into violent seizures and never recovered. After that, playback was forbidden. Still, fragments of meaning began to emerge. Not words, not sentences, but impressions. Images of burden, of weight, of endless watching. Again and again, the same theme appeared. Something vast, forced to hold something even greater, straining against collapse. The name Atlas, chosen so long ago, now seemed prophetic. The researchers had not only touched another reality, they had glimpsed the Titan himself, or whatever truth that ancient myth had been built upon. It was a truth too enormous to face. By now, even the most rational scientists were unnerved. They had expected anomalies, perhaps glimpses of unexplained physics. What they encountered instead was a presence beyond human comprehension, aware, intelligent, and immense. A presence that had watched humanity long before they had built their machines. And worse still, they feared that their intrusion had not been unnoticed. After each session, volunteers reported dreams filled with towering figures and suffocating darkness. Some woke screaming, convinced they were still being watched. A guard stationed outside one of the chambers described shadows moving along the walls where no one stood. Instruments sometimes activated themselves in the middle of the night, recording signals though no experiment was underway. The conclusion became unavoidable. Whatever they had contacted was not confined to the laboratories. It had followed them out. Panic spread among the inner circles of Atlas. Notes were burned, equipment dismantled, entire wings sealed. Whistleblowers tried once more to speak out, warning that the experiments had gone too far. They argued that humanity had brushed against something older than civilization itself, and that knowledge of it could fracture the world. Their warnings were not heeded. They were silenced. The project was sealed almost overnight. Facilities were emptied, machinery destroyed or relocated, records erased. Only the faintest traces survived, in rumors, in fragments, in the memories of those who could not forget what they had seen. What they had uncovered in Atlas was not a scientific breakthrough, nor a technological triumph. It was a revelation that tore at the fragile fabric of human understanding, a truth too vast, too dangerous to ever be spoken aloud. And so, like a stone cast into deep water, Atlas was buried. The ripples faded, the surface grew calm, and the terrifying discovery slipped back into silence, waiting for the day it might be uncovered once more.
The laboratories of Atlas were dismantled, their corridors emptied, their machines reduced to dust or quietly relocated. Officially, the project had never existed. But silence does not erase what has already been set in motion. It only conceals the echoes. And the echoes of Atlas would continue to surface, again and again across the decades that followed. The first signs appeared only a few years after the project's closure. In scattered reports from remote regions, people described phenomena eerily similar to what Atlas researchers had once observed. Unexplained bursts of energy, sudden temperature drops, strange vibrations that made the air hum. Farmers in rural valleys spoke of nights where the stars seemed to shift in the sky, rearranging themselves into patterns that lasted only moments before dissolving. Soldiers stationed in remote outposts described waking from identical dreams, visions of colossal structures rising into darkness, the same images reported by Atlas volunteers years before. The incidents were dismissed as folklore, as coincidences, as stress-induced hallucinations. Yet the patterns were too precise, too consistent to ignore. Whenever someone tried to investigate further, the trail was cut short. Records went missing. Witnesses recanted their stories. Local officials were instructed to remain silent. By the 1970s, declassified intelligence files hinted at a troubling continuity. Internal memos described recurring anomalies at sites scattered across continents, deserts in North Africa, mountain ranges in South America, abandoned industrial zones in Eastern Europe. The details varied, but the descriptions repeated the same keywords again and again: resonance, vision, presence, burden. Buried deep in the margins of one report was a phrase almost identical to the warning whispered by Atlas whistleblowers 2 decades earlier. It sees us. The documents did not stay available for long. Many were quickly reclassified, others pulled from archives entirely, but not before copies circulated among researchers and journalists who began to piece together the puzzle. Each thread led back to the same erased name, 3i Atlas. The attempts to suppress these connections grew increasingly aggressive. Libraries reported entire collections of obscure journals vanishing overnight. Microfilm reels were found cut and scattered. In one European university, a graduate student researching Cold War anomalies had her office broken into. The only items taken were her notes, pages filled with diagrams she had copied from long-forgotten technical papers. She abandoned her thesis shortly after and disappeared from public life. Again and again, the story repeated. Whenever someone came too close to uncovering the patterns, silence descended. Not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of enforcement. Why such fear? Why the need for global suppression when so many other strange projects of the Cold War era have since come to light? The answer may lie in what Atlas had revealed. The project had uncovered not just anomalies, but a presence, something vast, aware, and impossible to contain. If the public had known that such a presence existed, and that human experiments had brought it to the surface, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Faith in science, in government, in reality itself might have fractured. Civilization is built on stable ground. Atlas had shown that the ground was anything but stable. And so the silence was not national, it was international. Across borders, across ideologies, a quiet agreement seemed to form. This knowledge must never be allowed to surface. It was not an American secret, nor a Soviet one, nor belonging to any single power. It was a human secret. The evidence of that unspoken pact is found in the way patterns of suppression recur in every corner of the globe. A journalist in South America uncovers testimony of miners who stumbled on an underground chamber humming with vibrations. His story is pulled before publication. A physicist in Moscow notes strange anomalies in magnetic readings that match Atlas-era documents. She is reassigned and her data locked away. A team of geologists in Asia detect unexplained seismic pulses, regular and rhythmic, deep beneath the Earth. Their findings are sealed under national security classification. Different nations, different tongues, but always the same result: silence. Occasionally, pieces slipped through. In the 1980s, a series of leaked photographs showed instruments in a sealed chamber glowing with unexplainable light. In the 1990s, a retired soldier gave a radio interview describing his nightmares after guarding a site he was never told the name of. In 2000s, fragments of audio recordings surfaced online, low, resonant tones that caused unease and nausea in those who listened. Each time, the material was quickly removed, buried under claims of forgery, hoax, or misinterpretation. Yet buried, the patterns remain visible. The same symbols, the same visions, the same recurring theme. An immense weight pressing down, an unseen presence observing, the endless burden of Atlas.
It is not difficult to imagine why silence was enforced globally. The knowledge was not only terrifying, it was contagious. To hear of Atlas was to see the patterns everywhere, in myth, in folklore, in unexplained events across history. The more people looked, the more they would find, until belief itself might summon the very thing governments sought to suppress. Silence, then, was the only safeguard. But silence is imperfect. Memories linger. Stories slip through. Whispers find their way into the cracks of official history. And in those whispers, the patterns remain, stretching across decades like threads in a vast tapestry. Threads that, once traced, lead back to the same forgotten name. 3I, Atlas. Even as the world moved forward, through wars, revolutions, technological triumphs, the shadow of Atlas followed, hidden, erased, but never gone. Because some truths, no matter how carefully suppressed, refuse to vanish. They wait in silence, patient and watchful, until someone dares to speak their name again.
The deeper one traces the threads of Atlas, the more they seem to weave into the very fabric of human history. What was uncovered in those laboratories was not new, not an anomaly born of modern science, but something ancient, something that had been known in fragments and symbols for thousands of years. Across cultures, across eras, stories appear of beings condemned to hold up unbearable burdens. In Greek myth, the Titan Atlas, punished to carry the heavens upon his shoulders. In Norse sagas, Ymir, the primordial giant whose body was carved into the structure of the world. In Hindu tradition, the serpent Anantashesha, upon whose coils the universe itself is balanced. Each culture, separated by oceans and centuries, yet echoing the same image, a colossal figure bearing a weight too vast to imagine. What if these myths were not inventions, but memories? Distorted echoes of something glimpsed long ago, preserved in the only form ancient humanity could understand, story and symbol. The visions reported by Atlas volunteers of towering figures in endless plains are hauntingly similar to these ancient tales. The sense of a burden carried, of strain against collapse, of beings existing not to live, but to endure. Was it coincidence that modern instruments touched the same presence our ancestors described in their myths? Or had humanity, throughout history, brushed against the same truth only to veil it in myth, because the reality was too immense to endure? If this is true, then the project did not uncover a new phenomenon. It rediscovered something ancient, something that has always been here, pressing against the edges of human perception. And that raises a question more unsettling than any other. What exactly is being carried? What burden is so vast that it requires a presence beyond comprehension to sustain it? Some researchers whispered of a cosmic architecture, that our universe itself might not be self-sustaining, but propped up by an intelligence, a force, an unwilling sentinel. If Atlas was indeed real, then perhaps it was not a myth at all, but a reflection of reality, that existence depends on the suffering of something immense, unseen, and eternal. The implications are staggering. If humanity has glimpsed this truth before, it means our religions, our philosophies, our understanding of reality itself may all be shadows cast by the same hidden presence. What we call gods, titans, spirits, may not be inventions of the mind, but distorted encounters with the same incomprehensible truth that Atlas uncovered in its laboratories. But if this is so, then the danger becomes clear. Knowledge is not neutral. To know that our reality might be propped up on something immense and suffering would not inspire unity or peace. It would inspire fear,
despair, perhaps even madness. How could one live a normal life, go to work, raise children, plant crops, if they believed existence itself was balanced on the shoulders of a chained, sentient force watching from the shadows? And worse, what if our awareness of it is not passive? What if the act of knowing draws its attention closer? Atlas researchers suspected as much. They feared that by probing too deeply, they had awakened the notice of the very thing they sought to study. Volunteers felt it staring back, invading their dreams, imposing visions not of their own making. If that is true, then perhaps humanity's survival depends on ignorance. The less we look, the less it sees. That might explain why silence was enforced so fiercely, not merely to control information, but to protect humanity from the consequences of knowing. A truth too heavy to bear, a knowledge that might itself open the door for intrusion. And yet the silence has cracks. Myths, legends, whispered stories, scattered reports, all of them trace back to the same shadow. Human history is a palimpsest, written over and over, but beneath each layer, the faint outline of Atlas remains. What does this mean for our future? If Atlas was silenced once, it will be silenced again. But the presence it uncovered cannot be erased. It lingers at the edges of awareness, waiting for each new civilization to stumble upon it once more. And as our technology advances, as we build instruments capable of peering deeper into the structures of space and consciousness, the likelihood grows that we will find it once more. Some argue we already have. Reports of unexplained cosmic radiation bursts, of repeating signals from deep space, of energy anomalies in quantum experiments. Each could be another thread in the same tapestry. Perhaps we are already brushing against the edges, just as the Atlas researchers once did. And if that is the case, then we stand at the threshold of repeating their mistake. To know too much is to invite the gaze of something vast, and once noticed, it does not turn away. The myths may be warnings disguised as stories. Do not awaken the bearer of the burden, for its burden is also ours. If it falters, if it collapses, what it carries may collapse with it, and we along with it. That possibility alone makes the knowledge dangerous, not because it can be weaponized, not because it can be exploited, but because it alters the human mind in ways that cannot be undone. Once the truth is glimpsed, it cannot be forgotten. Once believed, it reshapes everything. It is no wonder, then, that Atlas was buried in silence, not to conceal a weapon, but to shield us from a truth that might destroy the very idea of being human. Because to be human is to live in the illusion of stability, to believe that tomorrow will resemble today. To strip away that illusion, to reveal the unbearable weight beneath reality, might unravel the very thread of civilization. And so the truth remains hidden, passed through myth, hinted at in legend, rediscovered in shadows, only to be buried again. A cycle stretching across centuries, perhaps across millennia. Each time humanity steps too close to the edge, each time it recoils in fear. But the truth waits, patient, immense, unyielding, waiting for the moment that silence breaks and we are forced to face what we were never meant to know.
You have followed the whispers of Atlas through shadowed corridors of myth, memory, and silence. The echoes of what was uncovered linger like distant thunder, faint but impossible to ignore. Yet as the weight of this knowledge settles, there is something important to remember. Not all truths are meant to be held. Some are hidden not as punishment, but as protection. Think of the stories you've heard tonight as a veil, thin enough to glimpse shapes beyond it, but thick enough to shield you from their full intensity. Humanity has always needed such veils. The myths, the legends, the metaphors, they are gentle disguises for truths that might otherwise overwhelm us. The tale of Atlas carrying the heavens is one such disguise, a story that softens the unbearable with poetry. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it is not necessary to see the whole truth, not necessary to pierce the veil completely. What matters is knowing that life continues, that day follows night, that the earth beneath your feet remains steady, even if, behind the scenes, something unseen bears the burden of making it so. As you rest now, let that thought comfort you. The silence, the secrecy, the erasures of history, all of it may have been less about control and more about care. A way to keep the unbearable at bay, so that ordinary lives could unfold in peace. You need not carry the burden yourself. Instead, imagine the weight gently lifting from your shoulders. Whatever questions linger, whatever unease remains, let it slip away. Allow yourself to rest, to breathe, to release. The unknown will always be there, immense and watchful, but it does not demand anything from you in this moment. In this moment, you are safe. Close your eyes. Feel the rhythm of your breath, slow, steady, grounding. Each inhale a gathering of calm, each exhale a release of tension. The story of Atlas may linger in your thoughts, but let it soften, like a dream fading into distance. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a vast plain, the same kind described in visions and myths. The horizon stretches endlessly, but you are not alone. You feel no fear here. The immense figures of burden are far away, their silhouettes too distant to overwhelm. You watch them with quiet respect, and then you turn away, stepping back into your own world, your own life, your own small and steady rhythm. The truth remains, but it does not need to haunt you. It can stay where it belongs, in silence, in shadow, in the realm of myth and mystery. What you carry into sleep tonight is not the burden of Atlas, but the gentle reassurance that not all mysteries must be solved, not all doors must be opened. Sometimes it is enough to simply rest. So let your mind grow quiet now. Imagine a soft hum of energy, like the resonance of the earth itself, wrapping around you as a blanket of sound, gentle, protective, soothing. Let that hum carry you deeper as your body grows heavier, your breath slower, your thoughts more distant. The world beyond may be vast and unknowable, filled with presences and patterns we were never meant to grasp fully. But here, in this moment, in this quiet space, none of that matters. The only truth you need is the one you feel now: peace, stillness, rest. Drift with it. Let the story become a dream, and the dream dissolve into sleep. The veils will hold, the silence will protect, the burden will remain carried far beyond your reach. You are free. Sleep now.
The silence stretches now, long and deep, like the vast ocean at night. You have walked through history, through myth, through shadows of things humanity was never meant to see. Yet the story is not finished. The story continues, not in documents or archives, but in the quiet space inside your mind as you drift into rest. Chapter 8 begins where the written record ends, where memory dissolves, where knowledge becomes sensation, where whispers transform into dreams. Imagine yourself descending into a hidden library, older than any civilization. Dust falls gently from ceilings that stretch into darkness. The shelves are endless, filled with volumes bound in leather, stone, and materials you cannot name. Many are blank. Some contain symbols you cannot read. And a few whisper as you pass, as though the ink itself remembers being written. You run your fingers along their spines, and you realize this is where the fragments of Atlas have always lived, not in official archives, not in classified vaults, but in the collective memory of humanity itself. Myths, dreams, visions, all of them stored here, in a place that is not physical, but shared. You pause at a single book. Its cover bears no title, only the impression of a figure bent under an invisible weight. You open it, and the pages are blank. Yet as you stare, words begin to form, slowly, deliberately, as though written from the other side of the page. They do not form sentences you can understand. Instead, they form impressions, feelings, images. A sky cracking like glass, a river of light flowing backward, eyes that watch not with sight, but with presence. And then a phrase that chills and soothes all at once. The burden is not yours. You close the book. The whisper fades. Deeper you go through corridors that bend and twist, each one lined with echoes of forgotten stories. Babylonian carvings of beings who hold up the heavens. Egyptian hieroglyphs of pillars separating chaos from order. Celtic chants of unseen guardians who strain against collapse. Each story a shard of the same mirror. Each myth a fragment of Atlas. You begin to understand. The truth was never hidden entirely. It was scattered, broken, disguised as story so that it could survive without crushing the human mind. It lives in lullabies, in symbols carved into temple walls, in stories told beside ancient fires. We have always known. We have always remembered. Only the form has changed. And still, the silence persists. You hear it now, a silence so profound it hums in your bones, not empty, but filled with presence. Like standing inside a cathedral where no voice is raised, yet the air itself vibrates with reverence. It is the silence of Atlas. The silence of a weight so immense that words cannot hold it. You realize then why the knowledge is dangerous, not because it is false, but because it is too true. It demands awareness, and awareness draws its gaze. To know Atlas is to stand at the edge of the void and feel it staring back. To sense that your thoughts, your very noticing, are part of the burden it carries. And yet, there is also comfort in this. For if the presence has endured since the first stories, it will endure long after your own life has passed. Whatever it holds, it continues to hold. Whatever it bears, it continues to bear. The silence is not fragile. It is eternal. Let that thought soothe you as you sink deeper. Imagine now that you step out of the library and into an open field beneath a starless sky. The air is cool, still. In the distance, you see the silhouette of a figure vast beyond measure, shoulders bowed under a weight you cannot see. It does not move. It does not falter. And though its form is immense, you feel no fear, only awe and a strange gratitude. You sit upon the grass, watching from afar. You do not need to approach. You do not need to understand. The burden is not yours. All that is asked of you is rest. And so you lie back, the earth supporting you, steady and unyielding. The silence wraps around you, a cocoon of safety. Your breath slows. Your body grows heavy. The figure remains at the horizon, distant but eternal, carrying the weight so that you do not have to. As your eyes close, the silence deepens further until it becomes indistinguishable from sleep. The myths dissolve. The library fades, the vast plain vanishes, and all that remains is peace. The story of Atlas continues, far beyond you, far beyond this moment. But here, in this chapter, in this silence, you are free to drift, to rest, to let go. Sleep now, in the quiet knowledge that some truths are too vast for human minds, and that is why they remain hidden. Sleep now in the comfort that you are shielded by veils of myth and silence, protected from the unbearable. Sleep now in the gentle certainty that the burden will never be yours to carry.
The silence has carried you far, yet it stretches further still, a horizon without end, a dream folding into another dream. Each chapter has drawn you closer to something hidden, something immense. But Chapter 9 is different. Chapter 9 is not about discovery, it is about surrender. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a boundless sea at night. The water is darker than the sky above it, still as glass, reflecting nothing. There are no stars here, no moon, no shoreline behind you, only the quiet vastness before you. You take a breath, and then a step forward. The surface of the water does not break beneath you. Instead, it accepts you. Gently, silently, it draws you down. You begin to sink, slowly, calmly. Gravity itself seems softened, reshaped into something tender. The sea folds around you, not as cold, not as suffocating, but as if it has always known you. The water carries you deeper, but your lungs remain steady. Each breath comes easily, as though the ocean itself has become the air. Around you, faint lights appear, scattered like lanterns beneath the surface. They flicker and pulse, soft and rhythmic. Their glow does not illuminate the water, but it steadies you. You notice how they beat in time with your heart. Each flicker matches the rhythm of your breath, a living pulse guiding you deeper into stillness. And then, far below, the vast shape reveals itself. Neither creature nor machine, neither god nor myth, its form shifts constantly, impossible to hold in your mind. One moment it seems to be a tower rising from the abyss, the next a figure bent under invisible weight, then something formless like a shadow of the world itself. But its presence is undeniable. A gravity of awareness radiates from it, as though the ocean itself bends toward it. You are gazing once more upon the truth of Atlas, not in story, not in fragments of erased documents, but in the dreaming language of the deep. It does not move.
It does not need to. Its stillness is a kind of motion. Its endurance is its breath. You sense it has been here since before memory, since before stars, watching, bearing, holding. And in its vastness you understand this presence is not an enemy, not a savior. It simply is, a truth older than anything human. The lights around you pulse brighter now, glowing in patterns that weave across the abyss. You see shapes forming inside them, each light carrying a fragment of memory. One shows ancient fires where elders told stories of titans bending beneath the heavens. Another flickers into temple walls carved with images of serpents supporting the sky. Another glows into visions of chants sung in caves, warding away collapse. Every light is a story you've already heard in fragments. Every flicker is a reminder humanity has always brushed against this truth. We have always remembered, even if only in dreams. You are not the first to descend here. You will not be the last. The presence stirs, not with movement, but with recognition. A subtle shift, as though it has noticed you noticing it. A resonance fills the sea, vibrating softly through your bones. Not words, not language, but meaning. You hear it inside yourself. You are not meant to carry this. Rest. The message is simple. The message is absolute. The burden is not yours. It was not yours. It will never be yours. All that is asked of you is this: breathe, release, sleep. The silence will hold. The veils will protect. The burden will remain carried far away, beyond reach. You need only close your eyes, surrender to the quiet, and drift into the deep.